The lion's heartbeat faded until a single voice pulled him back. A lion, broken, freezing, and on the edge of death, burst into a Montana hospital late one winter night. But when doctors found what was tangled in his claws, everything changed. It sent an entire town racing into the storm, searching for answers no one was prepared to face, and a truth that left everyone speechless. The night had been quiet enough that Dr. Evan Brooks could hear the soft ticking of the wall clock over the faint hum of hospital machinery. He was finishing a chart, the kind of ordinary task that marked another slow shift at St. Helena Regional Hospital, when a scream tore through the hallway so violently it made his pen fall from his hand. At first he thought a patient had fallen, or that a fight had broken out near triage. But then came the second wave of sounds, boots pounding, a woman shouting, something heavy being dragged across the floor. Evan pushed back from his desk and hurried toward the corridor, his heart already climbing into his throat. As he rounded the corner into the main lobby, the scene hit him so hard he stopped mid-stride. 3 long-haul truckers stumbled through the automatic doors, their clothes streaked with dirt and blood, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Between them hung something so shocking, so out of place in a rural Montana hospital, that Evan almost believed he was dreaming. Suspended between their arms, draped over a blue tarp, was the massive, blood-soaked body of a young male lion. The men struggled under its weight, grunting, each step unsteady as they tried not to drop the animal. Behind them, the night wind pushed in a rush of cold air, carrying the metallic scent of blood into the lobby. A receptionist gasped and ducked behind her counter. A nurse screamed and pressed herself against the wall. A security guard reached for his baton, his hand trembling as he stared at the animal's open jaws and the streak of bright red crossing its muzzle. "Keep back! Everyone stay back!" he shouted, though his voice cracked as if he wasn't sure whether he wanted to run or faint. Evan's mind struggled to catch up. A lion, a real lion, in Montana, in his hospital. "Doctor, please!" one of the truckers wheezed, his breath ragged. "He's still breathing! We didn't know where else to go!" Another man, younger and shaking, pointed at the tarp. "He just collapsed in front of our rig. Just fell over like he'd been running for his life." The lion's chest quivered in shallow, broken movements. Each breath rattled like it might be the last. Its front legs dangled unnaturally, and its fur, once golden, was matted with dirt, pine needles, and darkening blood. Evan could see the rise and fall of its ribs, the visible outline of bones beneath the hide. Whatever had happened to this animal, it had not been quick or merciful. "Everyone make space!" Evan called, louder than he intended. His instinct as a physician overtook everything: fear, disbelief, shock. "Move the chairs! Clear the lobby!" Staff scrambled to obey, though several kept their distance, eyes wide. The lion let out a sound, half growl, half moan, that filled the room with a deep, vibrating dread. A paramedic flinched. The security guard took 2 steps back, but Evan stepped closer, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. He had seen trauma victims before: hunters, hikers, people crushed in ATV accidents, but nothing like this. There was something in the lion's expression, something that looked almost like desperation. The truckers eased the tarp onto the floor. The lion's head rolled to the side, teeth bared in pain, breath shuddering. Its eyes fluttered half open, golden, glassy, searching the room without focus. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. "What happened?" Evan asked, kneeling, though he kept his movements slow, deliberate. The oldest trucker wiped his forehead with a sleeve. "We were coming down Highway 200, maybe 15 miles out. He came out of nowhere, stumbled onto the road. He wasn't trying to attack us. He was trying to get to us." The younger man nodded, swallowing hard. "He looked straight at our lights, like he needed help. Then he collapsed. We couldn't just leave him there." Evan felt a chill cut across his spine. Lions didn't seek help from humans. They avoided them, feared them, fought them. But this animal had dragged itself out of the forest and onto a highway. For what? For whom? He glanced over the body again, noting the tremors along the lion's flank, the deep lacerations across its neck, and the way its breathing grew weaker with each passing moment. "We need to secure the area," Evan said firmly. "He's too weak to hurt anyone right now, but we don't take chances." The guard hesitated, then nodded, moving to block off the entrance. The nurses peered from behind corners, unsure whether to come closer or flee. Evan reached out slowly, letting the lion see his hand, letting it smell him. The lion's eyes widened slightly, and its breath hitched, not in aggression, but in agony. Its body folded inward like it was bracing against a pain too deep to voice. "It's okay," Evan murmured, though his heart thudded so hard he felt it in his ears. "You're safe. We've got you now." A soft gasp rippled through the staff as the lion's paw twitched, then fell limp. Its breathing faltered. The air grew thick and still. Evan leaned closer, feeling for the pulse beneath its jaw, his fingertips brushing warm, wet fur. "He's fading," Evan whispered. The trucker closest to him clenched his jaw, eyes shining with fear. "Doctor, we didn't bring him here to watch him die." Evan met the man's gaze and something settled inside him. Resolve, duty, the strange, unshakable belief that this lion had not stumbled into their world without reason. "Then we won't let him," Evan said. "Get me supplies, blankets, IV access, anything we have that can help stabilize him." A murmur rose among the staff. Someone whispered that this was crazy. Someone else said it was impossible. But Evan's voice cut clean through the chaos. "This animal fought to get here. He fought to stay alive long enough to reach us. That means something. Now move." And for the first time since the screams shattered the quiet night, the hospital sprang into coordinated motion. Nurses dashed for equipment. Technicians pushed crash carts. The security guard held the doors steady. The truckers stood aside, breathing heavily, watching the doctor take command. Evan bent over the lion, placing a steadying hand on its trembling side. The animal's skin twitched under his touch, but it didn't pull away. Its breath rattled again, faint, fragile, slipping. In the stark glow of the lobby lights, with fear thick in the air and a wild creature dying at his feet, Evan Brooks realized one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever had driven this lion into their hospital, the story was far from over, and tonight was only the beginning. For a long moment, no one moved. The lion's ragged breaths echoed through the lobby like the ticking of a failing clock, each one weaker than the last. Dr. Evan Brooks rose to his feet, his pulse pounding hard enough to blur the corners of his vision. All around him, the hospital staff hovered in stunned silence. Nurses with trembling hands, orderlies frozen mid-step, the security guard gripping his baton with knuckles white as chalk. The three truckers stood closest, their boots still wet with melted snow from the highway, eyes glued to the lion as though it might suddenly spring back to life. Instead, the creature lay still. "Close the doors," Evan said, voice low but steady. "Lock down the lobby. Nobody moves past this area unless I clear it." The guard hesitated, his eyes shifting between the unconscious animal and the doctor. Then he nodded and pushed the heavy glass doors shut, securing the bolt. Outside, the wind howled against the building, rattling the metal frame like something restless trying to get in or out. Evan crouched again, examining the deep indentation around the lion's neck. The wound wasn't new. It wasn't clean. It wasn't natural. The skin around it was raw, irritated, the fur missing in a ring as if something had been tightened around its throat for days. The smell of dried blood mixed with the faint scent of rust. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared, trying to piece together what kind of life had brought this creature onto a Montana highway in the dead of winter. "Doctor?" the youngest trucker whispered. "He won't die here, will he?" Evan didn't answer. Not yet. He reached gently for the lion's paw, careful not to startle it, though the animal was too weak to react. The paw was huge, nearly the width of Evan's entire forearm, and the pads were cracked, bleeding in places. Embedded between the coarse hairs near the joint, something caught the glow of the fluorescent lights, a glint of color. Evan leaned closer, narrowing his eyes as he carefully separated the wet fur. A small strip of fabric, torn, faded blue, paper-thin from friction. A child's shirt. Behind him, the automatic lights flickered on as another nurse approached from the hallway, a tray of supplies clattering in her shaking hands. "Doctor, is that what I think it is?" Evan didn't respond. His mind worked silently, running possibilities, none of them comforting. The lion shifted slightly, its breath catching in a painful jerk, and Evan snapped back into motion. "We need to keep him alive long enough to know what happened," he said. "Let's get him into the ER bay. Move slow. Don't crowd him." "Are you sure about this?" the guard asked. "We aren't equipped for this kind of things. He's a wild animal." Evan lifted his head, his voice firm. "He came here because we're the only ones who could help." For reasons Evan couldn't explain, not medically, not logically, he believed that with absolute certainty. They brought in heavy blankets, sliding them under the lion's body. The animal didn't resist. It barely seemed aware of what was happening as the men lifted him carefully, inch by inch, onto a reinforced stretcher meant for bariatric patients. The frame creaked under the weight. The nurses stepped back to give space, watching wide-eyed as the lion's massive form rolled into the hallway, the stretcher wheels humming across the tile floor. "Easy," Evan murmured. "Keep his head stable." The lion's breathing hitched again, a wet, rattling sound that made every hair on Evan's arm stand on end. They turned down the corridor toward the only room large enough to hold the animal. Trauma Bay 3. Normally reserved for severe ATV accidents or multiple injury crashes, the room suddenly felt too small, its sterile white walls reflecting the surreal image of a wild predator fighting for life on a stretcher. Inside, monitors beeped softly. A surgical lamp glowed overhead. The air carried the cold smell of disinfectant. Evan snapped into professional precision. "We need oxygen. 2 lines, 1 on standby. Bring the crash cart close, but don't block the exit. And get me the heaviest sedation we have. But do not administer until I call it." The staff scrambled. Fear still lingered in their movements, but training pulled them forward. The lion groaned as they shifted him onto the trauma table. Its sides rose and fell unevenly, each breath a labored climb. Foam had begun to form at the corner of its mouth. Its tail twitched once, then stilled completely. "Doctor," a nurse whispered, "what if he wakes up frightened? What if he panics?" "He won't," Evan said quietly. "Not in this condition. But he'll die if we waste time worrying about that." The words weren't unkind, just true. He placed a stethoscope against the lion's chest, pressing lightly. He expected a slow, erratic rhythm. Instead, what he heard nearly stopped his own heart. A gallop, a frantic, stumbling gallop, the heartbeat of an animal drowning in shock. "This isn't from a car," Evan murmured. "He didn't collapse from a collision. Something else tore him up before he hit that road." Mark, the oldest trucker, stepped closer. "Doc, we didn't hit him. We swear it. We hit the brakes before he reached us. He was already bleeding like this." Evan nodded. It matched what he saw. A nurse approached with gloves, her face pale. "Do you think someone hurt him?" "Someone or something," he answered, gently lifting one of the lion's front legs to inspect the underside. "But whatever happened, it wasn't quick." The trucker swallowed hard. How does a lion end up in Montana anyway? Evan didn't know. But the raw ring around the lion's neck, the broken claws, the child's fabric tangled in its fur, all of it pointed to a life chained, hunted, or both. Doctor. Another nurse pointed to the monitors. His oxygen's crashing. The numbers dipped dangerously low. Evan's stomach clenched. Push the oxygen now, he ordered, and get me suction. They worked fast. Evan steadied the lion's head, guiding the mask into place, careful not to pinch the sides of its muzzle. The lion gasped, chest arching painfully as air flowed in. For a split second, its eyes flickered open, just a sliver, and met Evan's gaze. Not wildness, not fury, just fear, and something that felt eerily like pleading. "You're going to make it," Evan whispered, unsure if he was reassuring the lion or himself. The truckers exchanged glances. One crossed himself quietly. The lion's breathing stabilized for a moment, enough to slow the frantic beeping. Evan wiped sweat from his brow, feeling the tension of the room shift, just slightly, from sheer panic into a cautious hope. But then the lion's body convulsed, its back arching as a harsh guttural sound tore from its throat. The monitors spiked. The oxygen mask slipped. The stretcher trembled beneath the violent movement. "Hold him!" Evan shouted. Two nurses pressed gently but firmly at the lion's sides, trying to keep him from injuring himself. Evan repositioned the mask, but the lion's struggles grew weaker, then weaker still. Seconds later, the convulsions stopped entirely. The monitors flatlined into a thin, steady whine. A cold silence flooded the room. No, not yet," Evan said, his voice cracking. "Come on! Don't you dare give up now." He began compressions, slow, firm, exact, adjusted for the animal's anatomy. Sweat rolled down his temples. His arms shook. The room spun with voices, frantic and overlapping. Then, a faint thump. Another. The monitor flickered back to life. The lion breathed, but only barely. Everyone let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. Evan steadied himself on the edge of the table, drained but determined. He looked up at the staff, the fear still present, but now overshadowed by something else. Resolve. "We keep him alive," Evan said quietly, "no matter what it takes." And as he turned back to the lion, gently adjusting the oxygen mask, he thought of the small strip of blue fabric still lying on the tray beside him. Something told him this wounded creature had brought more than injuries to their door. It had brought a mystery, and someone out there, a child, might be depending on them to solve it. The weight of that realization clung to the room like a heavy fog. Dr. Evan Brooks stood still for a moment, staring down at the injured lion while its uneven breaths hissed through the oxygen mask. He had treated gunshot victims, frostbite cases, even the rare bear mauling, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. A lion, bleeding and broken, in a Montana hospital on a winter night, carrying a scrap of a child's shirt tangled in its fur. It didn't make sense, not yet, but the sense of urgency pressing into Evan's chest told him one thing clearly. Whatever happened out there in the woods wasn't over. He pulled off his gloves and reached for a fresh pair, the snap of the latex sounding sharper than usual in the trembling silence. Behind him, nurses whispered anxiously, their voices weaving between disbelief and fear. The lion's arrival had shattered the rhythm of the night, replacing the predictable hum of hospital life with an eerie sense of something brewing just beyond their understanding. "Doctor," a nurse said quietly, "his pulse is holding. For now." "For now," Evan echoed. That was all they had. He needed to know more. Where the lion had come from, what had caused its injuries, and how a piece of a child's shirt had found its way into its paw. He reached for a pair of shears and began trimming away the tangled fur along the deepest wounds, working slowly, methodically. The smell of dried blood hit him first, then the sting of something metallic, burnt, and unmistakably man-made. As he exposed the torn skin beneath, a low murmur spread through the room. "What? What is that?" a tech whispered. Evan leaned in, eyes narrowing. The wounds weren't claw marks, nor the jagged gashes left by territorial fights. These were straight lines, sharp, deliberate, painfully precise. The kind of cuts made by something unforgiving and cold. A wire. A chain. Something designed not just to restrain, but to wound. "I've never seen anything like this on a wild animal," he muttered. "Not unless someone meant to hurt him." The lion let out a thin, trembling sound, barely a growl, more like a whisper of pain. Evan froze, watching its entire body flinch under his touch. He softened his voice, taking a breath to steady himself. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. I promise." The nurses exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. One of them, a younger woman named Rena, stepped forward cautiously. "Doctor, the swelling around his throat, it's deeper than it looked." Evan nodded. "This isn't from natural behavior. He's been restrained, for days, maybe longer." Rena swallowed, her eyes shining with worry. "By who?" "That's the question," Evan said. He continued his examination, following the path of old scars hidden beneath matted fur. Some were small, circular, like burns. Others were jagged, as though the lion had thrown himself against metal, over and over, trying to break free. Every injury told a story of struggle, and every story pointed in the same direction: captivity. Then Evan found something else. A cracked rib that wasn't healing properly. A fracture to the foreleg that hadn't come from falling or misstepping, but from blunt force, something striking the lion repeatedly. "Someone beat him," Evan said under his breath, anger tightening his jaw. "This wasn't an accident." Mark, the oldest trucker, stepped forward. His voice came out rough. "Doc, you think someone kept him chained up? Out here? In Montana?" "I don't know," Evan said. "But I know cruelty when I see it. And this," he gestured at the deep ring of raw flesh around the lion's neck. "This was intentional." Rena clasped a hand over her mouth. "My God." The lion twitched again, its breathing hitching. Evan placed a hand gently on its side, feeling the tremor beneath his palm. He didn't know if the lion could understand words, but he spoke anyway, voice soft. "You're safe now. Whatever they did to you, it ends here." A beat passed, then another. Just as Evan reached for antiseptic, a sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, scattered voices, the security guard's urgent tone cutting through the noise. "Make way! We've got someone coming in!" The doors swung open, and a woman stumbled into the trauma bay. Her hair was disheveled, cheeks blotched with tears and cold, her coat half-zipped as though she'd run miles without stopping. Her voice came out broken, but loud enough to rattle everyone in the room. "Please, please tell me you've seen my son!" Evan turned sharply. There she was, Maggie Turner. She looked like she was still trying to breathe through a nightmare she hadn't woken from. Snow clung to her boots and cuffs, and her eyes, red, frantic, scanned the room as though she were searching for a ghost. "I was told. Someone saw something on the road," she gasped. "A child's shirt. Blue. My son, Jacob. He was wearing blue. Please, please tell me." Her gaze landed on the lion. The room fell dead silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Maggie covered her mouth, eyes filling with terror. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what is that? Why is there—" Evan raised both hands gently, stepping between her and the table. "Maggie, wait. Listen to me." She barely heard him. Her eyes locked onto the blood, the fur, the mass of wounded muscle lying on the table. Her legs shook, and she clung to a nearby stool to stay standing. That's blood, she said, voice trembling. Is that Jacob's? Did he? No, Evan said firmly. Maggie, no, we don't know anything yet. But you found a piece of his shirt, she cried, tears spilling over. That means he was there. That means that thing. It means he may still be alive, Evan said quietly. Those words froze her. What? She whispered. Evan softened his voice. This lion isn't acting like an attacker. Whatever happened, he fought something. Hard. And he may have been trying to protect your son. Maggie shook her head, overwhelmed, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Protect him? A lion? I know how it sounds, Evan said. But the evidence isn't pointing to him as the threat. Her eyes darted toward the animal again, and for the first time she really looked. Past the blood, past the terror, past the instinctive fear. And what she saw wasn't rage or violence. It was suffering, desperation, something far too human in the way the lion's body trembled with each breath. Maggie's hand dropped from her mouth. Did someone hurt him too? Yes, Evan said. Someone hurt him badly. She stared at the torn ring of flesh around the lion's neck, her expression softening from fear into something else entirely. A realization that chilled her to the bone. If someone could do that to him, she whispered, what could they be doing to my son? The truth of it hung heavy in the room. No one dared answer. Evan exhaled slowly, his heart pounding with renewed urgency. The lion wasn't the end of the mystery. He was the beginning. And somewhere out there in the freezing dark, a child needed them. For the first time that night, Evan felt the pull of something larger than fear, larger than the hospital walls, larger than the chaos swirling in the room. They had a chance to save 2 lives, but only if they moved fast. For a moment, the trauma bay stood frozen in a kind of stunned stillness, the air thick with fear, grief, and dawning realization. Maggie Turner clung to the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, her breaths shallow and uneven. She looked as though the world had tilted beneath her feet, and she hadn't found her balance yet. The lion's labored breathing filled the room with a steady, painful rhythm, and every rise of its chest reminded Evan that time was running out. Not just for the animal, but for the little boy still lost out in the bitter Montana cold. Mrs. Turner, Evan said softly, stepping toward her, I need you to breathe with me. I know you're terrified, but we need to focus. Every second counts right now. Maggie looked up at him, eyes wide and glassy. You don't understand. Jacob's afraid of the dark. He wouldn't have wandered far. He wouldn't just disappear. Something must have happened. Something awful. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands to her mouth to hold in a sob. Evan guided her gently to a chair, kneeling in front of her. We're going to find him. And this lion? He motioned toward the table. He may be the only reason we still can. She shook her head in disbelief, her voice trembling. You keep saying that. But how? How could a lion help him? Because, Evan said, lowering his voice, I think Jacob may have encountered the same people who did this to the lion. Maggie stared at him, lips parting in shock. Behind them, the door to the trauma bay opened again. Sheriff Dale Henning, gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, and heavy with years of experience, stepped inside. Snow clung to his boots, melting into puddles on the floor. He took in the scene quickly. The wounded lion, the bloody towels, the anxious staff, and Maggie trembling in the chair. Doc, he said, voice low. Dispatch said you needed law enforcement down here. Something about a wild animal and a missing child? Evan straightened. Sheriff, this lion may be connected to Jacob Turner's disappearance. He's carrying a piece of the boy's shirt, embedded in his paw. Henning's brows furrowed. You telling me that thing attacked the kid? No, Evan said firmly. I'm telling you he might have saved him. The sheriff looked from the lion to Maggie. Ma'am, did your boy go near the woods tonight? Maggie nodded, trembling. He was playing in the backyard. I went inside to get his coat, just for a minute. When I came back, he was gone. And you searched the property? Yes, she choked. We checked the yard, the road, the ditch, everything. The deputies came, but the snow was picking up and they said tracking would be difficult. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He turned back to Evan. All right, tell me what I'm looking at. Evan pulled back a section of fur to expose the ring of raw flesh around the lion's neck. Henning inhaled sharply. That's not a natural injury, the sheriff said. That's a restraint. Someone had him chained. Exactly, Evan said. And these scars. Look, burns, blunt trauma, untreated wounds. Sheriff, this lion didn't come down from some wildlife preserve. Someone held him captive. Someone hurt him. And that someone might have Jacob, Maggie whispered, her voice hollow with dread. All at once the pieces collided in the sheriff's mind. He straightened, eyes hardening. I'll call my deputies back out, he said. We'll sweep the woods again, expand the search grid. I'll contact search and rescue too. No more waiting for morning. Maggie shook her head frantically. No, Sheriff, please. He's been out there for hours already. It's so cold. We're not stopping, Henning said firmly. We'll find him. Evan glanced back at the lion. Its breaths came in ragged bursts, but it was still alive, still fighting. He wasn't sure if the animal would survive the next hour, let alone the night. But something told him its story was tangled up with Jacob's in a way none of them yet understood. As Evan reached for more saline to flush the wounds, the lion stirred again. Its massive body trembled, and its head twitched toward Maggie. Its eyes, barely open, caught hers for a fraction of a second. She froze. He's looking at me, she whispered. Evan watched the lion's gaze shift weakly toward the scrap of blue fabric on the tray. Then, slowly, painfully, the lion lifted one paw an inch off the table, as though trying to reach for it. Maggie gasped, a hand over her heart. Oh my God, she breathed. He remembers the shirt. The sheriff took a step closer, his expression tightening. Doc, is it possible the animal was trying to carry the boy somewhere, or protect him from something? I don't know, Evan said honestly, but he held onto that cloth for a reason. Maggie reached out, almost unconsciously, until her fingers touched the torn fabric. The lion let out a thin, guttural sound, pained but unmistakably charged with recognition. That sound went through Maggie like a knife. Oh God, she whispered. Something happened to Jacob. Something bad. Sheriff Henning placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Ma'am, we're going to follow every lead we have. And right now, this lion is our biggest one. The room grew silent except for the soft hum of medical monitors and the wind rattling the windows. Evan felt the weight of what lay ahead. The search through the winter darkness. The mystery of the lion's captivity. The fragile thread of hope binding all of it together. I need to keep stabilizing him, Evan said softly. We need him alive. Maggie nodded, wiping her tears. Do it, she whispered. Please. If he knows anything about my boy, don't let him die. Evan turned back to the table, gathering supplies. The lion flinched as he touched a tender wound, but didn't resist. Its strength was fading, but its will, whatever was driving it, held on like a flame trembling in the cold. As Evan worked, the sheriff radioed his deputies, ordering a full-scale search. Maggie sat pale and silent, fingers gripping the torn fabric like a lifeline, her eyes locked on the lion as though the creature held her son's fate in its battered frame. And in a way, Evan thought, maybe it did. Because this wasn't just a wounded animal. It was a witness, a survivor, and perhaps the only guide they had to finding a child lost in the freezing Montana night. The weight of that truth hung over the trauma bay like a storm cloud ready to burst. Every person in the room could feel it. Nurses standing stiffly near the walls, techs pretending to check equipment just to avoid staring at the lion, and Maggie Turner gripping the torn blue fabric in her trembling hands. It felt as though the entire hospital was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything to shift. But the only sound came from the slow beep of the heart monitor and the muted hum of oxygen sliding through the mask strapped over the lion's muzzle. Dr. Evan Brooks leaned over the table, eyes narrowed in deep concentration. The lion's pulse had steadied for a moment, but the reprieve was short-lived. The numbers dipped again, then climbed, then dipped once more, a roller coaster of fragile life that threatened to collapse with the slightest push. He had seen patients in shock before, but there was something deeply unsettling about watching a creature so powerful struggle just to breathe. "Doctor," Rena whispered, stepping closer. "His temperature's crashing." Evan touched the lion's flank, feeling the cold creeping through the fur. Hypothermia, shock, internal bleeding. Any one of them could kill him. Together, they were a ticking clock. "We need warm fluids," Evan said, "and increase the heat in the room. Not too much, just enough to keep him from dipping lower." Rena nodded and hurried off. Evan reached for the lion's foreleg once more, positioning it gently so he could insert another line. The animal barely reacted. Its once mighty muscles now hung slack beneath torn skin and dried blood. "Stay with me," Evan murmured. "You've made it this far. Don't stop now." Behind him, Maggie's voice came out small, fragile. "Is he dying?" "Not if I can help it," Evan said, keeping his tone steady. "He's fighting. That's all we need him to do right now." "But if he dies—" Maggie swallowed hard, fingers closing around the fabric. "Then we lose our only clue." Evan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was etched across his face. Sheriff Henning re-entered the room with 2 deputies behind him, his expression grave. Snow glistened on his shoulders, and the cold made his beard look frosted. "Search and rescue is mobilizing," he said. "We've got drones warming up, dogs on standby, volunteers on the way. But we need direction. If that lion knows anything, we're going to need him alive." As if hearing its name, the lion let out a shallow groan, one so soft that everyone leaned in to listen. Its paw twitched again, sliding slightly against the white sheet beneath it. Evan steadied the leg with care. "He's aware," Evan said. "Barely, but he's fighting to stay with us." The sheriff stepped closer, careful not to get too near the table. "Doc, if it comes down to it, and that animal wakes up, are we going to be able to keep control of him?" "He won't be able to move on his own for a while," Evan replied. "Right now he's too weak to stand, let alone attack. Fear isn't the problem here. His body shutting down is." Henning exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "We'll keep the hall clear. No one gets through unless you approve it." Once the deputies stepped out, the room seemed to fall under a heavy silence again. Maggie stood, pacing slowly, anxiously wringing the torn fabric between her fingers. Every so often, she stopped and glanced toward the lion, as though searching its battered form for a sign. "What if he's trying to tell us something?" she whispered. Evan looked up. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, voice trembling. "He looked at me, right at me, and he reached toward the shirt, like he recognized it." Evan studied the lion's face, the twitch of its eyelids, the faint furrow along its brow. He remembered how the animal had turned its gaze, weak but deliberate, toward the piece of fabric earlier. Even now, its head lay turned slightly in that direction. "He's not afraid of you," Evan said slowly. "Animals that are hurt this badly, they usually lash out. But he didn't." Maggie shook her head, tears threatening again. He looked almost sad." Evan didn't respond. But inside, something shifted. The lion wasn't behaving like a wild predator accidentally stumbling into human territory. Its actions weren't random. They were purposeful, intentional. "He's holding on for a reason," Evan murmured. Suddenly, the lion's chest jerked violently. The monitors spiked, screaming an alarm that sent staff rushing back into motion. "Doctor!" Rena shouted. "His heart rate is crashing again." Evan's stomach dropped. He grabbed the crash cart and pulled it nearer, hands moving before his mind fully registered the crisis. "Prepare adrenaline," he ordered. "We're losing him." Maggie pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide with horror as Evan leaned over the lion's chest. The animal's breaths had become shallow gasps, rapid and uneven, like a drowning swimmer fighting for the surface. "Come on," Evan said under his breath. "Stay awake. Stay here." He pressed gently along the ribs, searching for the right angle to give compressions if needed. The lion's body trembled beneath his hands. "Adrenaline ready," a nurse called. "On my mark," Evan said. The lion's eyes fluttered open, just a thin sliver, but the moment they did, the room seemed to hold its breath. They weren't wild eyes, not angry eyes. They were pleading. "Jacob," Maggie whispered, as though the name had slipped from her mouth without permission. The lion let out a thin, broken rumble. "Doctor," Rena said, voice cracking. He responded to her voice." Evan's heart thudded hard. He looked between the lion and the woman standing pale and shaking near the bed. The connection was undeniable. It defied logic, defied fear, defied everything he'd ever understood about wild animals. But it was there. "Mrs. Turner," Evan said, his voice steady but urgent. "Talk to him." "What?" she whispered. "Talk to him," he repeated. "Whatever happened out there, he remembers. He recognizes you." Maggie stepped closer, her legs trembling with each movement. She stood just a few feet from the lion, hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking apart. "Please," she whispered softly, leaning in. "If you saw my son, if he's still out there, please help us find him. Don't give up, please." The lion's breaths steadied, just slightly, but enough to make Evan freeze. "Doctor," Rena murmured, eyes wide. "His vitals, they're climbing." "Keep talking," Evan urged. Maggie wiped a tear from her cheek. Her voice, though trembling, grew stronger. "You protected him, didn't you?" she whispered. "You tried to save him. I don't know why you did it, but please, stay with us. I'm begging you." The lion's paw twitched again. One claw brushed against the edge of the sheet. Its breathing deepened. The monitors steadied. And for the first time since it had been dragged through the hospital doors, the lion's chest rose in an even, steady rhythm. Evan exhaled with a long, shuddering breath. The nurses lowered their shoulders, relief softening their faces. Maggie pressed a hand against her heart, eyes brimming with tears. "He heard you," Evan said softly. She nodded, wiping her face. "Then we still have a chance." Evan looked down at the lion, this battered, tortured animal who had defied every expectation, every fear. Now he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Jacob. And somewhere in the dark maze of the Montana wilderness, the boy was waiting for someone to find him, waiting for this lion to stay alive long enough to show them the way. The truth of that sat heavy on everyone in the room. Even the hum of the monitors felt louder now, pulsing through the silence like a distant heartbeat, guiding them towards something they weren't yet ready to face. Maggie Turner wiped at her eyes with the back of her trembling hand, her gaze fixed on the lion, as if her stare alone could keep him tethered to life. Evan watched her for a moment, recognizing the raw, aching hope in her expression, the kind that shakes a person to their bones, because it's the only thing left standing between them and despair. "We have to start searching now," Maggie said suddenly, her voice cracking but firm. "We can't wait any longer." Sheriff Henning nodded. "We're already mobilizing. But it's a big area, Maggie. Snow's coming down hard. We need every clue we can get." Evan stepped back from the table and stripped off his gloves, his eyes still locked on the lion's battered frame. "Then let's start with the most obvious clue. The lion didn't wander onto the road by chance. Something drove him there." "Or someone," Maggie whispered. The sheriff motioned to his deputy. "Let's get the search dogs ready, and pull up every county report from the last few months. Missing animals, suspicious vehicles, trespassing complaints. Anything that might point us in the right direction." The deputy hurried off. The room seemed to tilt with the urgency of a search widening by the second. Evan moved around the table, scanning the lion's injuries with fresh eyes, not just as wounds to heal, but as signs, breadcrumbs pointing toward a darkness tucked somewhere in the Montana woods. "This isn't from another animal," Evan said, his brow furrowed. "These wounds were made by metal." The sheriff leaned closer. "You're talking about traps, cages, and restraints," Evan added. "Look at the burn marks, the scars on the legs. This lion was held captive for a long time." Maggie's breath hitched. Jacob could be near whoever did this. Evan didn't have to say it aloud. They all understood. If someone was cruel enough to abuse a lion, then a 7-year-old boy alone in the freezing cold would stand no chance. "We're not letting that happen," Henning said. "We'll find him." Evan looked down again, noticing a faint smear of sap on the lion's hind leg. "This is fresh, pine sap. It means he brushed against trees before collapsing on the highway. And look, mud from a creek bed. Whatever trail he came from, it wasn't far from water." Henning nodded. "There's a creek about 2 miles from here, near those old logging roads." "Do people go out there?" Maggie asked. The sheriff hesitated. "Not legally. The roads were closed years back, but there's been talk about poachers using the area. Nothing confirmed." Evan felt a chill crawl across his spine. This lion wasn't in a fight. He was escaping. Maggie clasped the fabric of Jacob's shirt tighter. "Do you think Jacob was near that place? Near where the lion escaped?" "It's possible," Evan said. "If Jacob wandered into the woods and someone grabbed him, the lion may have intervened." "How?" Maggie whispered. "Why would he?" Her voice broke again. "He's a wild animal." Evan didn't have answers. Only an instinct that this lion, against all odds, had tried to do something no one expected. "Sometimes," Evan said gently, "animals sense danger before we do, and sometimes they do the unexpected." Before Maggie could respond, the lion suddenly jerked, its whole body shuddering with a violent tremor. The monitors shrilled as its pulse spiked, then plummeted. Rena rushed forward. "Doctor! He's going into shock again!" Evan grabbed the lion's flank, trying to steady the massive body. "Get the warming blankets, now! We can't let his temperature drop any lower." Maggie stepped back, hands pressed against her mouth. Tears filled her eyes again. But this time it wasn't just fear of losing the lion. It was fear of losing the last thread connecting her to Jacob. The lion's breath rattled painfully, each inhale sounding like a saw cutting through wood. Evan placed his hand flat on its ribcage, feeling the tremble beneath his fingers. "Easy," he whispered. "Stay with me. Just stay with me." The lion's eyelids fluttered weakly. For a heartbeat, its gaze met Evan's. Golden, glassy, slipping in and out of consciousness. Then it sagged, its head dropping against the table. "No!" Maggie gasped. "Please, no!" Evan leaned over, listening for breath, counting each rise of the chest. The lion's heartbeat stumbled again. "We're losing him," Rena cried. "Not yet," Evan growled through clenched teeth. "Not tonight." He worked faster, warming blankets, fluids, pressure to slow the internal bleeding. The lion's body trembled, then slowly settled as the warmth spread. The monitors steadied, not perfect, but not plummeting either. Maggie let out a shaky breath. "Oh, thank God." Evan stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. His hands were trembling, but he forced them still. "We don't have much time," he said quietly. "He's stable for the moment, but we need to follow his trail while we still can, before the snow covers everything." Henning nodded. "I've got deputies already prepping snowmobiles and ATVs. We'll take the old logging road and work our way to the creek." Maggie looked from the sheriff to the lion. "I'm coming with you." "No," Henning said immediately. "It's too dangerous, too cold." "I don't care," she snapped, voice cracking. "My son is out there, and if something happens to him while I'm sitting here doing nothing, I'll never forgive myself." Henning hesitated. The depth of a mother's fear was something even a sheriff couldn't argue with entirely. "We'll keep you close," he said finally, "but you stay with my team." Maggie nodded, her jaw clenched with determination. Evan turned back to the lion one last time before they headed out. The massive creature lay still but breathing, its chest rising in uneven but present rhythms. Evan placed a hand gently on its side. "Help us," he whispered. "Just hold on until we come back." As he pulled away, the lion's paw twitched again, the faintest movement, but one that carried more meaning than any roar. Sheriff Henning opened the door, letting in a blast of icy wind. "Let's move," he said. "We follow the trail where the lion came from." Maggie took a deep breath, gripping her son's torn fabric like a prayer. And together, they stepped into the cold Montana night, toward the dark woods, toward the unknown, toward the place where a lion had fought for his life, and maybe for a little boy's. The hunt for Jacob had begun. Inside the hospital, however, a different battle was reaching its breaking point. As the search party pushed out into the storm, the trauma bay filled with an eerie quiet, broken only by the low hum of machinery and the faint rasp of air passing through the lion's oxygen mask. Dr. Evan Brooks remained by the table, his sleeves rolled up, muscles tight with exhaustion and adrenaline. The lion's condition had worsened in the last few minutes, and though Evan had tried to hide it from Maggie before she left, he knew the truth. The animal was slipping. Rena, the nurse who had been by Evan's side all night, checked the monitors again and shook her head. "Doctor, his blood pressure is collapsing." Evan didn't respond immediately. He didn't have room in his mind for panic. Not now. He reached for more gauze, pressing it against the stubborn wound along the lion's abdomen, a deep tear partly hidden by fur that refused to clot. Blood seeped through the layers, warm and steady. Too steady. "He's bleeding internally," Evan whispered. "We don't have much time." Rena swallowed hard. "Do we wait for a veterinarian? Wildlife rescue? Someone with big cat experience?" "We don't have hours. We barely have minutes," Evan said. "If we wait, he dies. And if he dies—" His voice trailed off, but the weight of the unspoken truth hung heavy in the room. If the lion dies, the last real clue to Jacob's location dies with him. Evan turned to the tray where metal forceps glinted under the overhead lights. He felt his heartbeat slow, like his body was bracing for what came next. "Prep for surgery. Now." Rena stared at him. "Sir, this isn't standard procedure. We aren't set up for this. This is a lion." "I know," Evan said calmly, "but he's also a patient, and right now, He's the only one who knows what happened out there. They moved in a synchronized rush, every motion purposeful despite their fear. The lion's breaths came in shallow bursts, each so fragile it felt like a small miracle he was still clinging to life. Evan adjusted the surgical lamp, its bright circle illuminating the deep gash across the lion's abdomen. The wound wasn't clean. It wasn't natural. The jagged edges were exactly like the bite of metal teeth, like the edge of a trap. He must have stepped on one, Evan murmured, examining it closer. Or used his body weight to break it. Rena's voice wavered. Why would he do something like that? For Jacob, Evan whispered. The idea settled into the room, impossible but undeniable. Evan steadied his hands, inhaled deeply, and began. A thin line of incision, a gentle push through tissue, a flash of dark, pooled blood beneath. The lion twitched involuntarily, but the sedatives held. The monitors beeped erratically, too fast, too slow, and each fluctuation sent a jolt of worry up Evan's spine. Keep the fluids going, he said, and start suction. Rena worked quickly, her movements precise despite the sweat collecting on her brow. Another nurse held a clamp, trying to keep pressure off the damaged tissue. The lion's heart rate plummeted, then spiked, then plummeted again. Come on, Evan urged through clenched teeth. As he reached deeper into the wound, his fingers brushed something hard. Metal. He grasped it gently and pulled it free. A sharp, rusted fragment of a steel trap, jagged and cruel. Rena gasped. Dear Lord. Evan set the fragment aside. He fought his way out of it. Or fought to get someone else out, Rena whispered. Evan didn't answer, but the thought echoed deeply inside him. He worked quickly, stitching torn muscle, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Sweat dripped down his temples, blurring his vision. The lion's breaths grew weaker with every passing second. Evan could feel the life fading beneath his hands. Stay with me, he murmured. You didn't escape that trap just to die here. But the lion's body convulsed suddenly, a violent tremor shaking the entire table. The monitors shrilled, alarms blaring in every direction. Doctor! Rena yelled. He's going into full cardiac collapse. Evan's heart lurched. Charge the paddles, now! We can't shock him, his size. Charge them. They scrambled. Rena hesitated but obeyed, turning the defibrillator on and adjusting the settings as best as she could estimate for a creature of this size. Evan placed his hands on the lion's chest, feeling the massive ribcage beneath trembling, like something caught between worlds. He saved that boy, Evan said under his breath. I know he did. Now it's our turn. Paddles ready, Rena cried. Clear! Evan pressed the paddles against the lion's chest. A surge of electricity rippled through the room, the smell of singed fur mixing with the antiseptic air. The lion's body jerked violently, then fell still. The monitors stuttered, showing nothing but a flat line. No, Rena whispered. Evan refused to accept it. Again! Doctor, again! Clear! Another shock, another jolt, another flatline. Come on, fight! Evan shouted, slamming his palm onto the lion's chest and beginning compressions. The absurdity of the image, a man performing CPR on a lion, was not lost on anyone, but desperation leaves no room for rational thought. Breathe, Evan said. Don't quit on me now! He pressed harder, counting compressions under his breath, sweat dripping onto the lion's fur. Rena blinked back tears, whispering prayers under her breath. Then, a flicker on the monitor, a blip, another. A weak, thready heartbeat returned. He's back, Rena whispered shakily. Doctor, he's back! Evan exhaled, his whole body sagging in relief. Stabilize him, slowly now. They worked with renewed focus, easing the lion out of the crisis. The heartbeat steadied, not strong, but steady enough. The bleeding slowed, The lion's chest rose in shallow but rhythmic breaths. He was alive. Barely, but alive. Evan stepped back, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. His hands trembled, but it was the trembling of a man who had pulled something back from the brink. He looked down at the lion with a strange mix of awe and gratitude. "You're one hell of a fighter," he said quietly. "Jacob's lucky you were out there." For the first time in nearly an hour, the trauma bay felt less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. The lion, battered and broken, had survived yet another assault on his life, this time with help. Evan placed a light hand on the lion's shoulder and whispered, "Hold on just a little longer. They're out there looking for him. And when they find Jacob, you'll have been the reason." Outside, the storm raged on, pounding against the hospital windows. But inside, for the briefest moment, hope flickered. The lion had lived. And somewhere in the icy woods, a little boy still might be waiting for rescue. Long after the search party's vehicles disappeared into the swirling curtains of snow, the hospital hallway outside Trauma Bay 3 settled into an uneasy quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt stretched thin, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to rupture. Inside the bay, under the bright surgical lamps and the steady blink of monitors, Dr. Evan Brooks lingered at the lion's side, refusing to let exhaustion pull him even an inch away. He had kept the animal alive through the impossible: shock, blood loss, a trap wound buried deep in the abdomen, and 2 near collapses of the heart. Now the lion lay wrapped in warming blankets, its massive ribcage rising in slow, uneven waves. The room smelled of antiseptic, iron, and the faint musk of the wild, a reminder that this creature did not belong in a place of tile floors and fluorescent lights. Rena approached quietly, a fresh IV bag in her hand. The glow of the overhead light caught the fatigue on her face. "Doctor," she whispered, "you've been standing for nearly 2 hours without a break. At least sit for a minute." "I'm fine," Evan murmured. She gave him a look that said she didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. She hung the IV near the lion's head and checked the line. The steady drip offered some reassurance, though not nearly enough. The lion twitched. It was faint, just the slightest tremor under the blanket, but it was enough to send both Evan and Rena leaning in closer. "Easy," Evan murmured. "You're all right. You're safe." The lion's eyelids fluttered, revealing a glimpse of its golden eyes, dazed, blurry, but alive. The pupils shifted slightly, adjusting to the light. A soft, broken rumble left its throat. Not a growl, more like the sound a creature made when it had reached the edge of suffering and wasn't sure if it had the strength to return. "He hears you," Rena whispered. Evan reached out, resting his hand gently against the lion's shoulder. Its muscles flinched, but the animal didn't pull away. "You fought to get here," he said softly. "You're not done yet. We need you to keep fighting." The lion blinked, slow and heavy, as though weighing whether it would stay in this world or slip out of it. "You're not alone anymore," Evan whispered. "We're with you." Outside the room, soft footsteps approached. The door opened, letting in a draft of cooler air along with the sheriff's deputy, Victor Hayes. Snow clung to his coat and beanie. His face was flushed from the cold. "Doctor," Hayes said quietly, "the sheriff asked me to check in. They've reached the old trail near the creek. Snow's thick out there, but they found tracks. A mix of lion prints and smaller ones." Evan's breath hitched. "Smaller?" Hayes nodded. "A child's." Rena clutched the chart she was holding. "So Jacob really was with the lion?" Hayes rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at the massive creature on the table before continuing. "The sheriff thinks the boy was dragged or guided through the woods. They found scuff marks, some broken branches, signs of struggle, but also signs the lion might have been trying to move him somewhere safe." Evan felt a rush of emotion, fear, hope, disbelief, all tangled together. Is the team close? Close as they can get in this weather, Hayes replied. But the trail's already half covered. They need something more, something that tells them where the lion came from. Evan looked down at the lion again, his jaw tightening. If only he could stand. As if hearing his words, the lion tried to shift, its paw dragging weakly against the sheet. A low, pained grunt slipped from its chest. The effort was too much. Its head fell back, body trembling. No, Evan said quickly, his hand moving to steady the trembling limb. Don't try yet. You're not ready. But something in the lion's eyes, something flickering just beneath the haze, suggested the animal didn't agree. He wants to move, Rena whispered, stunned. He wants to go. Evan shook his head. He can't. His sutures won't hold. His heart can't take it. Hayes exhaled slowly. Doc, if he doesn't show us where he came from, that trail is gone. The snow's covering everything. We're running out of time. The weight of that truth pressed heavily on all three of them. The storm outside had grown stronger, wind howling against the glass, snowflakes whipping sideways like shards of ice. A little boy was out there somewhere, and the one creature who knew his last location lay helpless on a surgery table. The lion's breathing grew uneven again. The machines beeped in erratic rhythms. Evan leaned over him, adjusting the oxygen mask. Stay with me, he whispered. Don't you give up. Not now. The lion blinked once, a slow, deliberate movement, as if acknowledging the plea. Suddenly, the monitors gave a shrill alarm, the blood pressure plunging, heart rate sputtering downward. Evan's breath caught as he watched the numbers fall. Not again, Rena gasped. The lion's body stiffened, its chest rising sharply, then falling too slowly. Evan grabbed the IV line, adjusting the flow. Come on, you made it this far. The lion's eyes half opened, unfocused, glassy, but then, incredibly, its paw reached out an inch, scraping weakly toward the edge of the table, toward the doorway, toward the direction of the woods. Evan froze. Doctor, Rena whispered, he's trying to guide you again. Hayes stepped forward, his voice trembling with realization. He's pointing. He remembers where he came from. The lion strained again, barely, but enough to slide the tips of his claws across the metal edge, scraping it like a signal. A plea. Evan swallowed hard. He's trying to tell us, the trail isn't where we think it is. Hayes pulled out his radio. Sheriff, come in. The lion's reacting. You might be off path. He's signaling a different direction. Static crackled through the room, followed by Henning's voice. Tell me where. Hayes looked at Evan. Evan looked at the lion. The lion's paw dragged again, this time to the left, before collapsing back onto the table. That direction, Evan said. Follow the northwest ridge instead of the creek. He came from there. Hayes relayed the message immediately. Another tremor ran through the lion's body. Evan steadied him, pressing a hand over the rib cage, feeling the faint, fluttering heartbeat. Hold on, Evan said. They're going the right way now. You did it. For a moment, the lion's eyes opened wider, clearer than before. And in that split second, Evan could swear there was understanding in the golden stare. The lion exhaled, long and shaky, and then his breathing steadied again. Rena wiped her eyes. He's waiting. He won't die until Jacob is found. Evan whispered, Then we're not done. Neither is he. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the lion lived. And for the first time since the night began, hope flickered, not as a faint spark, but as a quiet, steady flame. But outside, hope had to battle the punishing winter darkness. Snow fell in thick, wind-driven sheets as the sheriff's convoy crawled along the abandoned logging road cutting through the forest. The trees loomed tall and black on either side, their branches sagging under layers of white. Searchlights swept across the woods, carving tunnels of visibility out of the storm. Engines rumbled low, headlights flickered, radios crackled with strained voices. Everyone felt the same urgency, the same tightening fear that somewhere among those towering pines lay a boy running out of time. Sheriff Dale Henning stood on his snowmobile, scanning the landscape through the blinding snowfall. "Check the ridge!" he shouted through the radio, his deep voice carrying even over the roar of the storm. "The doctor said the lion came from northwest of the creek. We follow that direction, no deviation." Behind him, Maggie Turner rode bundled in a thick blanket on the back of Deputy Hayes's ATV, gripping the metal bar so hard her hands trembled. Her breath fogged in the freezing air, and though the deputies tried to shield her from the worst of the wind, the cold still bit through everything he wore. But she refused to stay behind. No one could have convinced her otherwise. "Are we close?" she shouted over the storm. Hayes glanced back at her, his expression tight. "We're getting warmer. Footprints are gone because of the snow, but the ridge lines up with what your lion signaled." She swallowed hard, clutching the torn scrap of Jacob's shirt inside her coat. "Please, God, let us find him." The convoy continued deeper into the woods. They passed abandoned hunting shacks, fallen trees, sections of fence half buried under drifts of white. At one point, they reached a split in the trail. One route dipped toward the frozen creek. The other rose sharply into the shadowed ridge. Henning braked hard and turned his snowmobile toward the ridge. "This way!" They fought their way up the incline, skidding over ice, climbing through drifts waist-deep. Even the dogs hesitated, whining from the cold. The forest grew darker, thicker, more suffocating with each passing yard. Suddenly, Hayes raised a hand. "Stop! Kill the engines!" One by one, the vehicles fell silent. The woods grew deathly still. "What is it?" Maggie whispered. Hayes pointed into the snow beside a fallen cedar. "Tracks." Everyone leaned in. Sure enough, faint impressions remained, large prints from a heavy animal, and smaller ones beside them, the shape of a child's boot. The snow hadn't fully buried them yet. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. "Jacob," she whispered. "He was here." Henning crouched, brushing snow aside. 2 sets of tracks, the lions and the boys. They were together. A deputy added, "and headed uphill." Henning rose, tightening his grip on his flashlight. "Everyone move. Slow and quiet. Watch for broken branches, blood, anything that stands out." They advanced up the ridge, the searchlights slicing through the snowfall. The storm muffled all sound, except the crunch of boots and the occasional creak of trees bending under the wind. Maggie stumbled once, but Hayes caught her arm and steadied her. "You all right?" he asked. "I won't stop," she said, breath shaking. "Not until I have him." As they climbed higher, the trees thinned, revealing a narrow overlook above the deeper forest below. Henning waved for the team to fan out. They searched meticulously, peering under fallen logs, scanning hollows in the rock, checking every shadow that might hide a small form. "Sheriff!" a voice called out suddenly. "Something here!" The team rushed toward the sound. A deputy knelt beside a cluster of bushes, holding up a small object in a gloved hand. Maggie's knees nearly gave out. It was Jacob's other glove, dark blue with worn stitching, now caked with snow and dirt. "He was here," she whispered. "He was here." Hayes looked around anxiously. Where would they go next? Where would the lion take him? Henning scanned the ridge. The terrain fell steeply on the far side, leading into a narrow ravine lined with tall spruces and thick brush. If the storm trapped them, they might have taken shelter from the wind. He raised his flashlight, pointing at the thicket below. "That ravine, that's the only place they'd be shielded." The team descended carefully, using ropes for support as the ground fell away in sharp, icy slopes. Maggie's breath came in short bursts, but she followed without hesitation, slipping and scrambling her way down. Hayes stayed inches from her, ready to catch her if she fell. When they reached the bottom, the air changed. The wind died, blocked by the towering walls of the ravine. It felt eerily quiet. Too quiet. Every crunch of snow underfoot sounded loud enough to echo. Henning signaled with a raised hand. The group fanned out in a slow arc, flashlights sweeping across drifts, trees, and dark hollows. "Jacob!" Henning called. "Jacob Turner! Can you hear us?" No answer. They pushed deeper. Maggie moved ahead faster than the deputies wanted, shouting her son's name into the darkness. "Jacob! Baby, it's Mom! Answer me!" Her voice cracked. The woods remained silent. Then, a faint sound. A whimper. Maggie froze, her eyes widening. "Did you hear that?" Henning motioned for silence. Everyone held still. There it was again. A soft, muffled cry carried on the wind like a ghost. "Jacob?" Maggie whispered. They followed the sound, weaving between ancient pines until they reached a narrow gap between two massive rocks. The cry was louder now. Hayes squeezed through the opening first, flashlight raised. "Oh my God," he breathed. Maggie pushed in after him and nearly collapsed. There, curled inside a shallow pocket between the rocks, lay Jacob Turner. His small body was wrapped in part of a torn jacket, snow dusted across his hair. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes half-lidded from exhaustion and cold. But he was alive. "Jacob!" Maggie sobbed, stumbling toward him. He blinked slowly, lifting a trembling hand toward her. "Mom?" "Yes, baby, I'm here," she cried, pulling him into her arms, holding him against her chest, as if she could warm him with love alone. "You're safe now. You're safe." Henning knelt beside them. "We need blankets, now!" Deputies rushed forward, wrapping Jacob in thermal layers, checking his pulse. Weak, but steady. Hayes examined the ground around the boy. "Look here. Lion tracks. Right beside him." He stayed with the boy, guarded him. Henning nodded solemnly. He didn't abandon him. He protected him. Maggie pressed her cheek to her son's hair, tears falling freely. "He saved my baby," she whispered. "That lion. He saved him." Above the ravine, the storm roared on, indifferent to the miracle it had tried to bury. But within the shelter of the rocks, mother and child clung to each other, fragile but whole, warmed by the hope that had carried them through the night. And far away, in a hospital lit by trembling fluorescent lights, a wounded lion lay breathing, just barely, but breathing still, waiting for the boy he had fought so hard to save. Deep in the ravine, Jacob Turner clung to his mother's coat as the deputies wrapped him in thermal blankets and prepared him for evacuation. The little boy trembled violently, teeth chattering, but his eyes, half open and glassy, never left the narrow opening between the rocks where he had last seen the lion. It was as if some part of his small, frozen world still lived back in that snowy forest, beside the creature that had kept him alive. "Let's get him out of here," Sheriff Henning ordered. "We need the medics on standby. Hypothermia's setting in." Maggie held Jacob tightly, whispering over and over, "You're safe. I've got you. Everything's going to be okay." Her tears soaked into his hair as she kissed the top of his cold forehead. For a moment, it seemed as though the nightmare was ending. Mother and son reunited, life triumphing over the deadly winter. But the woods were not finished with them. As the deputies secured Jacob onto the rescue stretcher, the wind shifted. A new sound drifted through the trees, faint, distant, but sharp enough to cut through the storm. A snapping branch, then another. Henning froze. His gloved hand lifted in warning. "Hold up," he whispered. "Quiet." The search party stilled, lanterns flickering against the walls of the ravine. Snowflakes hissed against the light beams like falling embers. A heavy silence followed, Too heavy, too sudden. Something moved in the woods. Not the shuffle of a small animal, not the groan of wind through trees. Heavier, deliberate, human. Hayes tightened his grip on his flashlight. "Sheriff, we're not alone out here." Maggie pulled Jacob closer to her chest, instinctively curling around him. "What do you mean?" she whispered, terror lacing every syllable. Henning didn't answer. Instead, he pointed 2 deputies to the ridge above, motioning them forward to scout. The men moved cautiously across the ice, boots crunching softly. Then voices, not friendly ones. "Should have checked the traps earlier. If that cat survived, could ruin everything." Hayes paled. "Sheriff, those are human voices." Maggie's heart slammed painfully in her chest. Jacob stirred weakly in her arms, whispering a single word that made her blood freeze. "Men." Henning crouched low beside her. "Jacob, sweetheart, can you hear me?" "What men?" Jacob's lips trembled. The ones who hurt the lion." The words fell like stones into the silence. Hayes swore under his breath. "Poachers. They're back." Henning's face hardened. "Everybody down. Lights off. Quiet." The search team dimmed their lanterns, then crouched among the trees and rocks, blending into the shadowed ravine. Snow swirled wildly, masking their presence, but also making it impossible to know how close the approaching figures were. Maggie trembled as she held Jacob tightly against her, trying to shield him with her body. The little boy whimpered, burying his face against her chest. Footsteps approached, slow, methodical, crunching the snow with heavy boots. Then came the metallic clink of a weapon being lifted. Hayes tensed. "You think the kid's still alive?" One of the voices growled from the darkness. "Doesn't matter," another replied coldly. "But if he saw us, we can't leave anything behind." Maggie squeezed her eyes shut, a silent sob catching in her throat. The deputies raised their weapons, eyes locked on Henning, awaiting his command. The sheriff mouthed the words, "Wait, not yet." The crunching footsteps grew louder. A flashlight beam sliced through the falling snow, passing dangerously close to their position. Maggie ducked her head, praying they wouldn't spot her or Jacob. The boy whimpered again. The poacher's footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" Hayes clamped a hand over his radio, silencing even the static. "There! Something moved." Another voice snarled, "Find it!" Before they could turn toward the ravine, a sound split the night. A roar, weak but unmistakably powerful, echoed across the forest. The lion. Maggie gasped. Jacob lifted his head, eyes widening. "Guardian?" Hayes whispered fiercely. "He's alive. The lion's alive." The poachers reacted instantly. "That's him," one shouted. "Finish it before anyone hears." They turned toward the sound, bolting through the trees with their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Henning seized the moment. "Now!" Deputies spread across the ravine in a coordinated burst of movement. 2 officers sprinted after the poachers, snow kicking up under their boots. Henning shouted orders into his radio, calling for backup and intercept teams. Hayes assisted Maggie, securing Jacob and lifting him into his arms. "We're moving now," Hayes said. "Stay with me, ma'am." But Maggie didn't move at first. Her tear-filled eyes turned toward the direction of the roar, her voice breaking. "He's still out there, and they're going to kill him." Hayes didn't hesitate. "We won't let that happen. The sheriff's on them, and that lion's tougher than he looks." Another roar came, softer this time, fading into the pounding wind. Maggie pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Please, don't let him die." Hayes carried Jacob through the snow as Henning's voice echoed across the ravine. "Move out! Get the boy to the medic team!" Behind them, flashlights danced through the trees. The deputies spread across the slope, some protecting the mother and child. others breaking off to track the poachers. At the ridge, the storm intensified, whipping snow across their faces. Hayes shielded Jacob as best he could and guided Maggie toward the vehicles waiting below. Engines rumbled to life one by one as deputies prepared to evacuate the child. But even as they reached the ATVs and snowmobiles, the forest was alive with distant shouts, angry voices, the crack of branches, the faint thunder of boots running across frozen ground, and above it all, another roar. This one weaker, strained, but desperate. Maggie stopped walking, tears streaming down her cold cheeks. "He saved my son," she whispered. "That lion saved my boy. Someone has to save him too." Hayes met her gaze, his features softening despite the chaos. "We will," he said quietly. "But first, we get Jacob safe. Then we go after them." Behind her, the pines shook in the howling wind. Somewhere in those shadows, a wounded lion fought a battle of his own, one he was in no shape to win alone. And while Jacob Turner was carried toward safety, the forest echoed with the unfolding clash between desperate men and a creature who had already given everything he had to protect a child not his own. The wind swallowed most sounds, but every now and then, a distant shout or muffled crash rose above the storm, warnings of a confrontation unfolding in the deep dark. As Maggie Turner clutched Jacob to her chest on the back of the ATV, her eyes kept flicking toward the tree line. Her heart throbbed painfully with each roar that tore through the forest, each one weaker than the last. She knew the lion had nothing left to give, not after his wounds, not after the escape, not after carrying her son through the freezing night. And yet, he was still fighting in the dark for reasons no human fully understood. "Stay low," Deputy Hayes said, his voice rough but gentle as he drove carefully through the drifts. "We're almost at the vehicles. Medics are waiting." Jacob stirred weakly in Maggie's arms. "Mom, the lion, he's hurt." His voice was barely a whisper, thin and shaky. "I know, baby," Maggie whispered back, pressing her lips to his forehead. "I know. They're going to help him." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. The storm was brutal, and the woods were vast, a maze of shadows and danger. And somewhere in that maze, men with guns were closing in on an animal running solely on bravery and instinct. When their convoy reached the clearing where the larger rescue vehicles waited, deputies quickly transferred Jacob to the medic team. Warm blankets, heated pads, and oxygen were applied in careful layers. A medic assessed his vitals. "Pulse is weak but present. Fingers are cold but responsive. He's going to make it," the medic reassured Maggie, offering a tight, encouraging smile. Relief washed over her, leaving her knees weak. "Thank you. Thank you." They loaded Jacob into the heated rescue ambulance, where sensors and warm air began pulling the cold from his fragile body. The door closed slowly, carefully, to shield him from the storm, but Maggie remained outside. Her hands were trembling, her breath coming out in shaken bursts of steam. "I'm going back," she said suddenly. Hayes whipped around. "Ma'am, absolutely not. You just got your son out. You're staying here." "No," she said firmly, voice trembling but resolute. "I can't leave that lion out there. He saved Jacob. He saved him." Before Hayes could argue, a loud crack echoed from somewhere beyond the ridge. Sharp, violent, something unmistakably wrong. Every deputy froze. Flashlights snapped upward, beams slicing through the storm. "That was a gunshot," Henning's voice sounded off from across the clearing as he fast-walked toward them. "Sheriff," Hayes called back, "the men are still in the woods. We heard voices earlier. They're hunting him." Henning's jaw tightened. "Then we move. All units, let's go. Move out now." Maggie stepped forward, eyes rimmed with tears. "Sheriff, Don't let them kill him. Please. He's the reason my son is alive. Henning's voice softened, but only for a fraction of a second. I know, and we're not letting those men walk out of those woods. He turned to his team. Fan out. Stay low. Watch your lights. They're desperate and dangerous. Engines roared back to life. Snowmobiles surged forward, deputies leaning against the wind as they steered toward the shrouded ridge. The storm swallowed them one by one until only their lights remained, ghostly streaks darting across the dark landscape. Maggie watched them disappear, her hand pressed to her chest, where Jacob's heartbeat had finally steadied against her. She whispered a silent prayer for her son, for the deputies, and for the lions still trapped in that hostile, frozen world. In the woods, the deputies followed the fading roar and the echo of gunfire, weaving between trees, pushing up slopes and sliding down icy banks. The storm punished them at every step, stinging their eyes, numbing fingers and feet. But they pressed on, guided by instinct, duty, and something else, a sense that they were running out of time. Up ahead, Henning raised his fist. The team halted. A shape lay half buried in snow near the base of a pine, large, still, fanned with a trail of red leading through the powder. The deputies hurried forward, flashlights revealing a tangled snare ripped from the lion's hind leg. He tore himself loose, Hayes muttered. Again. The blood was fresh, and nearby boot prints, several, not running away, running toward him. Henning crouched beside the snare. He's close, and so are they. The forest rumbled as wind tore at the trees. Then, cutting through the storm, a roar, not strong, not full, but alive, and followed immediately by a man's shout, "Get him, now!" Henning stood fast, adrenaline surging. "Move! Follow that sound!" Deputies sprinted through the snow, weapons drawn, flashlights swinging wildly, breaths burning in their lungs. The roar came again, more desperate, more broken. Then another gunshot ripped through the air, sparking terror through the team. They crested a ridge just as two shadowy figures appeared in their beams, crouched behind a fallen log, rifles raised. "Sheriff, contact ahead," Hayes yelled. "Drop your weapons," Henning bellowed. "Sheriff's department." But the men didn't drop them. One spun, firing blindly toward the lights. Deputies dove behind trees as snow exploded around them from the impact. "Return fire," Henning commanded. Shots rang out, cracking through the forest in flashes of light. The poachers scattered, scrambling for cover, slipping over ice. The deputies advanced strategically, forcing them toward the open clearing. One poacher slipped, his rifle skidding across the ground. Another tried to run, but a deputy tackled him from behind. Chaos erupted, echoing across the snowy ridge. Then Henning saw it. Near the center of the clearing, the lion. He lay on his side, sides heaving, breath steaming in desperate bursts. His golden eyes flickered open, full of pain, exhaustion, and something like resignation. Snow clung to his wounds. Blood stained the ground around him. But when he saw the deputies, he lifted his head, barely, weakly, but he lifted it. Henning's chest tightened. He's still alive. He's still fighting. The last poacher lunged toward the lion with something sharp glinting in his hand. Hayes didn't hesitate. He tackled the man before he could reach the animal, sending both crashing into the snow. Within minutes, the clearing fell silent, except for the wind and the lion's ragged breaths. "Call it in," Henning said, kneeling beside the animal. "Tell the hospital we're bringing him home." The lion's eyes fluttered, landing on Henning's face, and though he couldn't make a sound, his gaze said everything. He had fought his battle. He had protected the boy. And now he waited, not for death, but for rescue. Just as he had once waited at the hospital door. Henning placed a gloved hand gently on the lion's mane. "Hang in there, big fella. We're getting you back." As deputies secured the poachers and began preparing a stretcher strong enough to carry the massive animal, Snow continued to fall around them, softening the edges of the chaos, muting the sharp lines of blood and fear. And in the heart of the Montana wilderness, as dawn struggled to break through the storm, a wounded lion lay surrounded by the very humans he had once risked everything to find. This time, they were going to save him. The rescue team worked with urgent precision, their movements guided by both training and a deep sense of gratitude. The lion, this battered, courageous creature, had held on through the night when every instinct should have told him to surrender. He had defended a child not his own, outrun gunfire, broken through steel and cruelty, and dragged himself across miles of frozen forest. And now, beneath the pale, struggling light of dawn, he blinked weakly at the circle of deputies gathering around him. Sheriff Henning knelt beside him, brushing snow away from the lion's face. "Easy there," he murmured, voice softer than any deputy had ever heard from the old sheriff. "We've got you now. No more running. No more fighting. You're going home." The lion's eyes flickered in faint recognition, exhausted, unfocused, but alive. Hayes and two others unfolded the reinforced wildlife stretcher, thick canvas stretched across steel bars, built to support heavy weight. The wind bit at their faces as they maneuvered it closer, each man wincing at the sight of the lion's injuries. Blood stained the snow beneath him in the shape of a halo, sharp red against white. "Lift on 3, Hayes said. "Careful with his ribs. They took a beating." Henning placed both hands under the lion's shoulders, whispering encouragement as though the animal could understand every word. And somehow, the lion did understand, because he didn't flinch or resist. He let the humans take his weight, trusting them completely. 1, 2, 3. They lifted carefully, grunting under the immense mass. Even weakened and half-frozen, the lion was heavy, muscle, bone, and what little strength remained clinging to life. Once on the stretcher, his head fell to the side, and his breath puffed in shallow clouds. "We move now!" Henning barked. The deputies broke into a coordinated rhythm, carrying the stretcher through the woods toward the vehicles. Each step was cautious, but fast. The storm had begun to die down, the sky lightening from black to a bruised purple. The first hints of daybreak glimmered along the treetops. As they approached the clearing, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the paramedic team returning after securing Jacob. When they saw the lion on the stretcher, bundled in blankets and surrounded by deputies, a hush fell over the team. "That's him," Hayes said, breath visible in the cold air. "The one who kept that kid alive." The paramedics exchanged glances filled with something close to awe. They rolled out a larger trauma gurney and helped transfer the lion, a task that took nearly 6 people, all of them holding their breath. Maggie Turner stood near the ambulance, where Jacob lay safely wrapped and warmed. Her eyes widened when she saw the stretcher. She stepped forward, hand over her heart. "Oh my God," she whispered. The lion's golden eyes flickered open at the sound of her voice. Despite everything, pain, blood loss, exhaustion, he lifted his head just an inch. Maggie covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "You saved my son," she whispered. "You saved him." Her voice trembled in the cold air. The lion blinked slowly, as if acknowledging her words, before his head sank gently back onto the blanket. Henning placed a warm, steadying hand on her shoulder. "We'll get him to the hospital, Maggie. He bought Jacob the time he needed. Now we're returning the favor." They loaded the stretcher into the rescue transport truck, its back designed to carry wildlife in emergencies. Heated air flowed from vents inside, and the blankets were packed tightly around him. As the doors closed, Maggie pressed her palm to the cold glass window. "Stay with us," she whispered. "We're not losing you now." Henning signaled the convoy ahead. Engines roared to life, and the emergency vehicles sped toward St. Helena Regional Hospital, lights flashing across the snowy landscape. Behind them, the storm broke apart, revealing streaks of sunlight through scattered clouds. Hours later, as the sun rose gently over Montana, the lion was wheeled back into the same trauma bay where Evan Brooks had fought to save him the night before. This time, though, the doctor was ready. Scalpel sterilized, IV lines primed, the surgical team assembled. "Let's get to work," Evan said, voice firm and full of resolve. "He made it back. That means he hasn't given up, and neither are we." The surgical lights flared overhead as the team moved with practiced urgency. Evan checked the lion's vitals, grateful to see they were low but stable. The sedation flowed in. The lion's breathing evened. The room became a quiet battlefield where life and death hung in careful balance. Hours passed. Stitches, sutures, transfusions, warming pads. Evan worked tirelessly, pausing only when his hands trembled too much to hold the scalpel. But each time he steadied himself and pushed on. Finally, when the last bandage was wrapped and the final monitor beeped a steady rhythm, Evan stepped back. "He'll make it," he whispered. In the waiting hallway, Maggie and Jacob sat side by side, Jacob's small hand wrapped around his mother's trembling fingers. When Evan walked out, exhaustion lining his features, Maggie rose instantly. "Is he?" she choked out. Evan smiled faintly. "He's alive." Maggie covered her mouth, tears streaming. Jacob leaned into her, whispering, "Mom, he didn't leave me." "No, sweetheart," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "He never did." The hospital arranged for the lion, now officially nicknamed Guardian, to be transferred to the Yellowstone Wildlife Rescue Center once stable. Days passed, then weeks. Each morning brought a little more strength to his battered body. 6 weeks later, the sun sat high over Yellowstone's snowy fields as Maggie, Jacob, Evan, and Sheriff Henning stood before a massive fenced habitat. Trees, rocks, and tall grass sprawled inside, a world made for a creature like him. Guardian lay under a pine, his fur glowing in the sunlight. When he heard Jacob's small voice call out, "Guardian!" the lion lifted his head. Slowly, with steady strength, he stood and walked toward the fence. Jacob placed his hand against the metal bars. Guardian leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against Jacob's small palm. A silent thank you. A bond forged in fear, frost, and survival. Evan stood behind them, his voice soft as he watched the lion and the boy share that impossible moment. "Not all guardians," he murmured, "protect with swords or shields." Maggie turned toward him, eyes shining. Evan continued, "Some walk the earth on silent paws and still save lives." As the sun dipped behind the Montana mountains, the lion turned and walked back into his sanctuary, strong, whole, and home at last. A survivor, a protector, a guardian of the wild, and the memory of the boy he saved would echo in those woods and in every heart that heard his story for years to come. If this story touched you, let me know you're here. Just drop a simple 1 in the comments. Nothing more, nothing less. It's your quiet way of saying you felt something too. And if you'd like to walk with me into the next rescue, hit subscribe so you never miss the stories waiting just beyond the tree line. I'll see you in the next one.